Port Harcourt is quiet this week, but it is not the quiet of a city at rest. It is the quiet that follows a storm, when the wind has dropped and everyone is stepping outside to survey what still stands. On Wednesday, under a tent raised for the groundbreaking of a new medical factory in Rumosi, Governor Siminalayi Fubara walked to a podium and said the words that Rivers State has been waiting more than 2 years to hear. He was done fighting. He was joining the Rainbow Coalition, the political movement built and led by the man he had spent his governorship trying to outmaneuver, Nyesom Wike. There was no ambiguity in the language. Fubara endorsed Kingsley Chinda, the APC's choice for governor in 2027. He endorsed President Bola Tinubu for a second term, and he told the crowd, in front of cameras that would carry the moment across the country by nightfall, that the period of conflict in Rivers State was over. We have done what we needed to do, and now we are moving forward. He went further, telling his own supporters directly that he wanted no part of anything that could reopen division in the state. "I am not party to anything that will bring any form of disunity in this state," he said, almost as if issuing an instruction to whatever remained of his own camp. For a governor who commanded a bloc of loyalists willing to face down impeachment threats, who defected parties, who watched a state of emergency descend on his own government rather than yield, this was not a small statement. It was a surrender delivered in the language of unity, dressed as peace, but unmistakable in what it conceded. The reaction was immediate and split down the middle, the way reactions to this rivalry always have been. Some of Fubara's own supporters called it the end of his political career, a capitulation dressed up in reconciliation. Others called it survival, the only rational move left for a governor who had already been forced to withdraw from the APC primary in May, already stripped of any real path to a second term, already boxed in by an assembly that answers to Wike's loyalists and a party structure that never fully accepted him. Online, the phrase circulating among his own base by nightfall was blunt. He had ended his own political career, in their words, by his own hand. Whichever reading holds, the practical result is the same. Wike's camp insists it never lost control of the state's political machinery, and after Wednesday, there is little left to argue. The FCT minister did not need to win a war of attrition against the sitting governor in open combat. He needed Fubara to eventually walk into the room, and Fubara walked into the room. It has been a long walk. Reconciliation meetings brokered by President Tinubu came and went, 4 of them by February alone, each one producing a handshake, a photograph, and a truce that cracked within weeks. After one of those sessions, aides at the villa let it be known that Fubara had personally accompanied Wike back to his residence afterward and pledged to avoid anything that could be read as disrespect. It sounded at the time like theater. In hindsight, it reads more like the opening line of Wednesday's script. In May, Wike stood before reporters and distanced himself from Fubara entirely, refusing to endorse him for 2027, insisting the governor would serve only one term and that no side deal would change that. He said he had not aligned with the current administration in Rivers State and that any decision on who the coalition would back would only emerge after consultation among its members. A statement that, whether intended this way or not, made clear the decision was his to withhold or to grant. Weeks earlier, in a live media appearance, he had accused Fubara of failing to properly present the state budget to the assembly and of falling short of understandings reached during the earlier reconciliation efforts. By July, that position had not softened. If anything, it hardened into the outcome everyone in Rivers politics now says was inevitable. The warning signs were there even earlier than that, for anyone looking. In January, during what was billed as a routine thank you tour of local government areas, Wike told a crowd in Oyigbo that anyone meddling in Rivers affairs would get their fingers burnt. ACP officials in Abuja treated the remark as a breach of party discipline and called for his resignation as minister. Nothing came of the call. The remark stood, unpunished and unretracted, a small preview of how little Wike's position in the party structure would ultimately be affected by controversy that would have ended most political careers. What changed between January's threats and July's embrace was not Wike's posture. What changed was Fubara's math. A governor who presented a 1.85 trillion naira budget for 2026 still needed an assembly to pass it, still needed a party to carry him into any future contest, and still needed peace on the ground to claim any legacy at all from 3 years defined by paralysis. Earlier in July, Fubara appeared in person before Speaker Martin Amawele's chamber to formally submit that budget, the first time since the state of emergency the previous year that he had presented an appropriation bill to the Assembly at all. After the presentation, Amawele walked over, shook his hand, and the two men stood together in front of other lawmakers in a moment photographers were clearly waiting for. It was a small scene, but it told the same story that Wednesday's ceremony would tell in full. The governor was no longer negotiating from a position that allowed him to withhold recognition from the people Wike had put in place. The Ring Road tells a version of the same story in infrastructure form. The 50-kilometer Port Harcourt dual carriageway project had been one of Wike's signature undertakings as governor, and one of his sharper grievances after leaving office was that Fubara would not credit him for it, even at commissioning events. Earlier this year, during an inspection of the road, Fubara relented and publicly attributed the project's vision to his predecessor, promising it would be completed and delivered by October. It was a small correction, a matter of a few sentences at a podium, but in the accounting of this rivalry, small corrections have carried outsized weight. Each one has been a data point in a running tally of who was conceding ground to whom. So, where does Rivers State go from here? The immediate answer is toward 2027, and toward a field that Wike now shapes with startling clarity. Kingsley Chinda carries the endorsement of both the outgoing governor and the kingmaker who unseated him politically without ever holding office in the state again. The Rainbow Coalition, once one faction among several jostling for relevance, is now the platform that the sitting governor himself has joined. Opposition figures and rival power brokers who spent the past year building alternative coalitions, hoping to exploit a fractured Fubara camp, now face a consolidated field with Wike sitting visibly at its center.
Those rival efforts had been picking up real momentum only weeks earlier, with Fubara effectively out of the race after his May withdrawal from the primary. Political observers in Port Harcourt had described the state's politics as entering a new and open phase, with consultations and realignments underway among stakeholders, hoping to build a consensus candidate capable of challenging Wike's structure directly. Wike's loyalists, for their part, had made clear all along that they considered themselves firmly in charge, regardless of who else organized. Wednesday's announcement did not just settle the question of where Fubara stood. It effectively closed the door that opposition strategists had been trying to walk through. That does not mean the story is finished, whatever the ceremony in Rumuosi suggested. Nigerian political alliances have a way of fraying exactly when they look most solid, and this rivalry in particular has broken and reformed more times than anyone in Port Harcourt cares to count. A bombed assembly complex, a Supreme Court ruling on the legitimacy of the chamber, a state of emergency and an appointed administrator, impeachment threats revived and shelved and revived again. Each time observers pronounced the conflict over, it resumed a few weeks later in a different form. Fubara's own allies have not all fallen in line behind Wednesday's declaration, and the governor's remaining time in office, however diminished his ambitions now appear, will still be watched for any sign that his statement was tactical rather than final. There is also the matter of what Fubara receives in return beyond peace itself. A governor who steps back from re-election ambitions and delivers his political structure to a rival coalition typically expects something for it: protection from further legal or legislative harassment for the rest of his term, a soft landing into some future role, or simply the ability to finish his term without the assembly holding budgets and appointments hostage. None of that has been spelt out publicly, and Wike has not commented since Wednesday's declaration on what, if anything, was promised in exchange. The silence itself is being read in Port Harcourt as its own kind of signal that the terms, whatever they are, were settled well before the cameras arrived in Rumuosi. But for now, the balance of power in Rivers State is no longer in dispute. The governor who once refused to bend has bent. The predecessor who was mocked in some quarters as having no real leverage inside the APC, as a man whose influence extended no further than his personal access to the president, has proven over 3 grinding years that he had all the leverage that mattered. Wike did not need the governor's office to run Rivers State. He needed the governor eventually to admit it. And on a Wednesday afternoon in July, under a tent built for a groundbreaking, Sim Fubara did exactly that, in front of cameras, in front of his own supporters, and in front of the man whose coalition he had just agreed to join.